So welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar today titled Setting the Tone from the Top, Leading with Board Culture. My name's Sean McDonald, I'm from BoardPro, and I'll be your moderator for the next 45 odd minutes. As I said before, thanks a lot for turning up today. We appreciate the effort you've made to be here for our live webinar. And during the session, if you've got any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen or chat if that's your preference. We'll be answering these during the session and we'll try to get through as many of these as we have time for. And finally, this is the good bit. If you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering a really quick 1-minute survey at the end, you'll go into the draw to win our beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those who are not so familiar with BoardPro, we are a board software provider, sometimes called a board portal. We serve around 24,000 users around the globe, and I think we're in about 30 countries these days. And we enable organisations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively with, you guessed it, clever software, with less time and deliver more impact and value for the organisation. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organisations, especially those with resource constraints. And one of the ways we help achieve this mission is to run these many free webinars on our Governance Made Easy program.
Ngā mihi, thank you, Sean. Kia ora koutou, everyone. Welcome. Whether you're watching us live or watching us in the future via a recording, it's fantastic to have you here. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Hopefully that's taken over successfully now. What an important topic we've got today. Perhaps not an easy one to face up to, but one I'm sure that many of us can relate to, whether you're a board member, board chair, chief executive, or board advisor. As Sean has said, I'm Lloyd Mander from DOT Scorecard, that's Diversity of Thought Scorecard. We evaluate boards, senior teams to understand their diversity of thought and how they can apply it to address complex decisions. Actually, one of the reasons I developed my passion for research and consultancy in diversity of thought was specifically due to experiences I had with poor culture around boardroom tables. I've seen the spectrum from board members having a conflict of interest that's lingered far too long without being acknowledged and properly managed, through to the more typical presence of a board member who seeks to further a narrow special interest agenda as opposed to playing their role as part of the overall board team. I think it's important to recognise that boards live in glass houses. What goes on in the boardroom impacts not just the chief executive and the senior management team, but the wider organisation too. Boards have a role in supporting the development of teams and culture throughout their organisations, and they have perhaps more agency to address this directly than what they might realise. Today's session will go really fast. So as Sean has said, please do post your questions as we go, and we will try and get through as many of them as we can. As the problems perhaps don't require too much imagination, our focus will be very much on solutions and tactics that you can apply on your boards. However, as part of their introductions, I have asked our outstanding panelists of Georgia Henry and Rex Williams that they introduce themselves and also share a brief anecdote of what bad looks like too. Speaking of Georgia and Rex, I cannot reveal whether they are culture vultures or cultural chameleons, but I can certainly assure you all that they are avid board culture champions. For our introductions, we're going to start with Georgia and then move to Rex. I will then guide us through a series of rapid-fire discussion questions. So welcome, Georgia.
Thanks, Lloyd. Really pleased to be here and discussing a topic that is very close to my heart. And if anyone's heard me speak before, you know I get very passionate. So, Lloyd, you need to stop me if I start going full culture vulture into the discussions. So I'm the founder and CEO of Henry Reid. We're culture and leadership specialists, and have been operating Henry Reid for the last 7 years. And working with boards, and my passion for culture has come from a corporate career in human resources for global organisations, as well as local family businesses and many diverse organisations. because for me, culture is the only thing that makes a difference when we're talking about how do we achieve results and mitigate risks within the organisation. And what led me to start Henry Reid and particularly work with boards was similar to you, Lloyd, through my lived experiences of understanding that boards really don't realise or optimise the use of culture within their board and within the organisation to optimise the effectiveness of their outcomes. With looking at asked to share a story, I started thinking about the boards that perhaps only in the last 12 months. And instead of one story, I want to talk about the role of the chair. And the role of the chair, we're going to unpack a little bit further. But I've seen boards come unstuck when you have chairs who are either demonstrating narcissistic behaviour or bullying behaviour, being led by ego or being led by a need to control, or conversely being very non-confrontational and not addressing issues. And this can really derail the effectiveness of your board and your board culture, and often directors are at a loss as to how to address this. And so I'm looking forward to unpacking this in the session, because the impact of the relationship of the chair with the board or the chair with the CEO has an incredible impact on the whole organisation and the effectiveness of being able to achieve results and mitigate risks.
Excellent. Thank you. And that's a great intro into what we're going to be talking about today. Over to you, Rex. Welcome.
Thanks, Lloyd. So I'm Rex Williams, Kia ora tātou. I'm a civil engineer. I worked in the building materials industry for 30 years in New Zealand, Australia, the Pacific and Asia, working for a Swiss-owned corporate at that stage. I retired 17 years ago, and since then I've held governance roles in the health sector, tertiary education. I've been appointed to a regional council, and I chaired a group, the H.W. Richardson Group, which is a significant trucking company in New Zealand and Australia. In the last 10 years, I've moved more towards not-for-profits. So I've chaired a cycling advocacy group and presently chair a river care group. And so I've seen a wide range of governance activities and cultures. The example I'd like to use about the importance, I believe, of transparency and culture comes about from when I was in the trucking industry, and there was a significant accident, and it was deemed that the alcohol had been involved, company activity, unfortunately. So there was a ban, right? No alcohol on any site or in any situation. And that was duly approved by the board. And that evening, the board went out to dinner, and you could imagine that there was just a routine consumption of alcohol. And the next morning, when the invoice came through to accounts payable, that information was quickly spread throughout the company. And any idea that the company could the board could advocate for one thing and do something different was quickly lost. And the board actually, it was a terrible example to set. And that's one of the things that I've learned, is that examples, transparency, culture, call it what you will, comes from the board. And any idea that it's the board activities are not well known in the company are dreaming, to use that line.
Excellent one, Rex, and I'm sure one that's happened in different settings. It almost makes me think boards often talk about the front page test about their activities being revealed to the general public, but that's really the tea room test,
Yes.
which I think boards also have to be very aware of as well. So Rex, we're going to start with you. First, a discussion question relates around what is the first step to ensure that boards can support positive and constructive culture?
Yes, well, I think this is probably the most difficult thing, is recognition of the problem, recognition that culture a bad culture can exist, and that culture can be changed. And I've found, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, I've joined boards, not-for-profit boards, bad culture. And when I try to discuss the matter, there's just absolute zero recognition that there is a problem. And I've given some examples, some symptoms, but yes, that doesn't exist. So I think the first step is for all of us in governance to recognise that culture is important, and good culture can be very productive.
Georgia?
Yeah, for me, understanding or creating the basis for a positive and constructive culture is knowing what type of culture that needs to be for your organisation. Every organisation is unique, and your culture should be unique as well, because that's what sets you apart and gives you a competitive advantage. Our ways of working, what's most important to us, what we value, but also why do we exist, our purpose, and where are we headed, what's the impact we want to have through our vision. So for me, the basis for a positive and constructive culture starts in defining what does that actually mean. What is our purpose? What is our vision, our future impact? What are our beliefs? So what are those things that we believe that we are going to hold on to in any circumstance? And then what do we value that's going to translate into the behaviours that are going to help us get there? And that has to be known, defined from the board through the organisation, because if you don't have that basis of understanding, then how are you going to be able to make the right decisions, strategic decisions, look for evidence of current culture, and shift behaviours to be able to create that positive and constructive culture at a board level and also through the organisation. So for me, the basis starts with actually defining what that is for your unique organisation.
That's excellent. So I think you really, as you're saying, you really need a benchmark. So you've got something to build on, but also if you don't define things, then people just make things up. And sometimes they might make up good things. Sometimes they might make up quite counter things to your objectives.
Well, absolutely. Well, Lloyd, every organisation has a culture, whether by default or by design. So unless you're designing it and actually understanding what that means for your organisation, you are going to have a culture that's created by default and will not promote effectiveness in your organisation.
Excellent. Now, Rex, I know we've had conversations around nominators. So board members sometimes select themselves, sometimes there are other people involved in that process. What are your thoughts around them?
Yeah, so I think that the recognition of a problem is one step. The next step in dealing with it lies with the appointers, or how the board, the governance people, whether they're trusts or whether it's a local community board or whether it's a river care group, how does that governance group, how is it created? Who are the appointers? And as we know, I'll use the term boards, but I'm referring to the whole governance fraternity. As we know, many boards are self-perpetuating. Their membership comes from within. And so to change a culture, well, first of all, to recognise the problem and then to change a culture from within is quite difficult. And so I think that the appointment process needs to be examined. And I think that that's something that those of us in and around the boards can really think about, possibly look at the constitution, or whatever structure is your friend, what can be used in the structure to make sure that the appointments are constructive. And those appointments can, in commercial activities, can come from financiers. They can sometimes come from the chair suggesting things. There's a whole range of appointers, and I believe that the issue lies with the appointers.
I think it's one of those things that perhaps doesn't get enough prominence. So it's really good to keep raising that. And I can imagine that if someone's a board member going on to a board as a new board member or during their due diligence to consider a board, perhaps considering who the appointers are and what their processes has been and will be for appointing those around you is really an important consideration that can help to support or detract from what that board culture is ultimately going to be like.
And I think also understanding their expectations of you. If you're joining a board, and it's got you're joining for a reason. You're joining to contribute your time and your expertise and your ability to make a difference. You're not only looking at the purpose of the organisation, but what are the expectations of those other core stakeholders who may be appointers? Does that actually align? Is that actually demonstrated in the expectations for you as a director? Because if there's a misalignment between the stated purpose of the organisation and the expectations of those appointers, if those two things don't line up, then there's immediately going to be dissatisfaction and conflict, and it's going to really deteriorate your ability to be effective on the board. So I think it's, as a director, we've got responsibilities as well to understand, looking at who are those key stakeholders who are involved in appointing board members? Why are they making this decision? What are their expectations for you? Because that's going to have a huge impact on the culture of that team.
I'm hearing that making that good inquiry and clarity is really critical. Rex, one final point from you.
Well, Georgia used the terms dissatisfaction and conflict. I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. I know what you mean, Georgia, but I call it creative tension, because if we don't have some creative tension, we won't get the best from the board.
I agree 100%, and I think there's a difference between creative tension and negative tension. And if there's some being culturally aligned around an organisation doesn't mean that you don't have diversity of thought or the inability to question or challenge thinking. It means that you are holding at your core the things that are most important to that, for the success of that organisation and the people impacted by the organisation. So I agree 100%, Rex.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you guys have highlighted that, because one of our next points we were going to have here is around team players being appointed, but in no way do we mean team players in the sense of like-minded yes people.
Yeah.
We very much mean people that are going to play the issues as you've described. There will be a degree of discomfort, things. We are going to really throw things around and challenge things and challenge each other to add value to the process. It's not about forming a groupthink board team or anything like that. Now, our next discussion question relates to the chair, which, Georgia, you touched on in your introduction. So I'll ask you to kick us off with this one here. So what sort of considerations might we have when it comes to the chair in supporting effective board culture?
So I think it's a really interesting one, the effectiveness of the chair. First of all, does the chair know what their role and responsibility is? And quite often there's a bit of a disconnect between an understanding or expectations of the whole board around the role of the chair. In a lot of smaller organisations or not-for-profits, you have people in volunteer roles. They may not have held chair positions before. They may not have had board education or chair education. They may not be as experienced as some of the other directors. They may be working with a CEO who has been a founder of the organisation and been there for 30 years and is quite influential. And so as a board, when we're looking at board culture, again, we need to come back for what purpose? Why are we here? And what is the impact we need to have? And how do we work understanding our roles and our responsibilities? And how do we support those others in our board, whether they're the chair or not, to be the most effective they can be? So sometimes it is, it's one of those issues that directors ask me a lot of times for clarity around how do we support the effectiveness of the chair, particularly when you might have a chair who's got some of those traits that I mentioned before. They may be quite controlling, they may be non-confrontational, they may be a figurehead or a political figurehead that's been appointed. So supporting the effectiveness chair often has to be done with some empathy and understanding and certainly some diplomacy in addressing those issues, but not supporting the effectiveness of the chair by failing to address issues or failing to identify the impact of the chair's behaviours or decisions or interactions means that the whole board and the organisation becomes less effective.
If I could say one creative solution that I was involved with, in that I was chairing an organisation and it was time for me to step down. I'd done some time there. But, and I'm being conceited here, the board missed my active chairmanship at board meetings. I always made sure the agenda was well known, made sure they started on time, stopped people from repeating themselves, and always finished on time. So the board actually asked me to chair the meetings to keep things moving along. Mr. Bossy, they called me. But equally, on the other hand, I did not chair the organisation. Now, I'm not saying that's a solution for everybody, but we need to recognise that some people have skills and other people can have more time available.
Yeah, real sort of horses for courses sort of approach, and the fact that there is a standard way or a typical way doesn't mean that organisations can't have fit for purpose solutions for themselves. That's excellent.
Yeah, I think that comes to that roles and responsibilities, really getting some clarity around that, so the expectations are clear, and when things are not working so well, what are the methods that you have for addressing that? So again, actually knowing that as soon as you're working with a group of people, there are things that are going to work well and things that are not. That's part of reality, but have some ways of addressing those issues already determined and agreed.
I've got an excellent question from Andrew, actually relating to our prior conversation around nominators and situations perhaps where boards don't get to select their next board members. So it's a question around if it's a membership organisation and so members are elected, how do you ensure that you get quality candidates? Georgia, does this fit with your description around those clarity around where we're going and what our responsibilities are, that needs to be really well communicated to the nominators or the electors in this case if they're electing the board? Is that the right direction to head?
Yeah, look, it is, and it's a very common issue that Andrew's raised for membership organisations. So then if we look at board nominees from a membership base, even if you have real clarity about expectations or requirements for the role, you may not have that from the existing membership base. And so the quality of the candidate coming onto the board may not meet the expectations. So then it's really around how you are able to support that person. What are the expectations of the board around building capability and really setting expectations for contribution? So whether that is then by any new board members need to do some board education, how you're inducting them, what the orientation onto the board is, how are you building up that knowledge and capability to be able to contribute effectively. But it is one that member organisations certainly do struggle with in my experience. But clarity of expectations, and then once someone is elected to the board, how are you actually supporting them to be as effective as they can be.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now,
I'd like member organisations to contemplate a random selection from the membership and offering a governance role to that random selection, and people can either take it up or turn it down. And as long as they're members with an interest in the advancement of the organisation, why not choose them at random? I believe in some cases it could be no worse than the present situation that we've got.
very interesting. Thanks, Rex. No, it's you're always an innovator in this space. Thank you. No, it's a good provocation and challenge, I think, for us to think it from that perspective. Just to close off our supporting the chair, I think in our prior discussion with you guys, we had this idea that, and Georgie, you've covered this well, this idea that some people have leadership strengths. And I think, Rex, when you were saying that people don't necessarily need to carry all the load of the role of the chair. And that's, I guess, maybe a situation where, especially in the not-for-profit, the purpose sector, we do sometimes see co-chairs. And I guess that is because people have different strengths and different bandwidth. And that way together they can perhaps do a really good job of the role. But that point you've both made around really making sure that they are proactively supported and nothing sort of left to chance. Now, our next question is around structure. And Rex, we're going to start with you because you touched on this one before. So when it comes to meetings, formal or less formal? What's your preference? What's your advice?
Well, I prefer to start with a relatively formal structure. and things can become more relaxed after that. But if they start off in a relaxed manner, and it's then hard to formalise things. So better to start off with a pretty formal structure. Structure is your friend is one of the buzz phrases that I keep in mind. And it comes down to simple things like thinking about the year ahead, or the whatever period it is, thinking about it ahead, thinking about the diary, thinking about when the draft agenda will come out, thinking about agreeing the agenda between the chair and the CEO or whatever organisation or structure there is, and making sure that papers are prepared well ahead of time, that people get plenty of time to read them. It doesn't matter whether it's a profit or not for profit. People are pushed for time, and etc. So follow through that very formal structure. And similarly, in the meetings, I like to have an approval by the attendees at a board meeting. This is the agenda. Are we all happy with that? These are the important things we need to talk about. Do we have enough time for that? And discuss the agenda at the start of the meeting so that everybody buys into it, so that it's not seen as the chair or the CEO or the chair stroke CEO jamming things through. So I think formality to start is my approach, which I recommend.
Excellent. Georgia?
I'm a big fan of structure as a supporting part of every aspect of every organisation, but it has to be fit for purpose. So one of the examples I give is if you want to have, if part of the culture of your organisation is that you want to be very innovative and really a creative organisation, you want to be able to be very agile, then having a really tight structure can actually limit your ability to set the right tone from the top and drive the right culture. Similarly, if you're a very conservative, risk-averse organisation and you have a very loose structure around governance or around risk or around the way we do things, right down to how we're managing our board meetings, then your ability to be compliant and manage risks, mitigate risks, is less effective. So again, for me, structure is around how are you guiding the effectiveness of your board and your organisation according to the type of unique organisation culture that you have, and what is your purpose and what are you trying to achieve. So I think structure is a really important part of good governance, because it sets boundaries, it provides clarity of expectations, but it also has to be fit for purpose. So whether you're formal or informal, or how you are working with your board to support, to support the organisation, needs to suit the organisation. It's very different in a small not-for-profit with volunteer directors as opposed to a listed organisation. So again, you need to be thinking through, for what purpose are we doing these things, or do we require these things to be in place?
I think you both sort of articulated a similar thing in different ways there, really, where the structure can really enable culture, but it does need to be fit for purpose. It's not a sort of a set and forget thing, or that there is one way of doing things that's going to suit all organizational contexts. I'd like to actually take a little break before we tackle our next one, to tackle some questions. Now, I'm going to give one to each of you. So, George, we're going to start with you. This is back to our membership organisations before, I believe. So the question is it okay to lobby for a board position from your membership base?
Look, I don't see why not. Again, it depends on the organisation, precedents, what's in your board charter or constitution. Lobbying for a position shows a level of interest and a level of commitment and passion. But also, when we come back to looking at who are the appointers making the decision, and looking at, is this person who's lobbying for a position being the right person who's going to be, how are we going to manage this person on the board? So I don't see that there's an issue with someone who's showing a great desire to be part of the board, who's passionate about it, who wants to contribute. Membership-based boards generally have volunteers, so we do need to look for people who are willing to commit and provide their time and energy.
Thank you. We certainly can't have passengers that are
No.
letting everyone else carry the load.
Mm.
Now, Rex, for you, we had a question from Dom. Now, this relates to controlling chairs. Any suggestions for supporting the chair through their controlling approach, or because of their controlling approach?
Why would I want to support a controlling chair?
Oh.
No,
I think supporting in inverted commas, you could say
addressing it.
addressing it. Yes. Well, this comes to the whole question of trust within the board, and I believe it's a matter of, let's assume it's an average sized board or trust or whatever it is, that making sure that your view is not a lone view, is there someone else shares the view, having established that just because you hold the particular view on the chair's approach, that it's perhaps shared by one or two others, and then if it's the case, talk to the chair and say, look, I mean, I'm relatively new to this board, but I've spoken to one or two others, and quite frankly, I find your behaviour to be just so controlling that it's not constructive. And stop talking and see what the chair says. I mean, the hardest thing in that situation is to stop talking. Set out the fact, and then let the silence, let the controlling board chair fill the silence and see what happens. So I believe in being upfront, and as I say, as long as you're not bringing just a single view, being very upfront about it. Why not? What's to be lost? A lot to be gained.
Right,
Yeah.
try and obtain clarity and be curious and give them an opportunity to share their perspective. Georgia, a quick
I was going to jump in on this one, because this is an area that I support boards with a lot. Boards who have to address an issue and wanting to know how to do it. So I always the point Rex made about perspective is really important. What is it about the behaviour that's not okay? What is the evidence that it's not okay? So what have you observed or experienced about the behaviour that leads you to have a problem? Because often when we experience an issue, we have heightened emotion and heightened negative emotions and the impact. So if we actually can try and bring the emotion out of it by looking at what is the behaviour that we've observed or experienced, what is the impact of that helps bring perspective. So it's impacting, it's upsetting me, but it's not actually impacting our ways of operating as a board. Or if it is, there's a significant impact, and this is an issue that I need to address. And addressing an issue with someone is always easier when you can actually say, this is the observed behaviour or the evidence behaviour and the impact that it's having. And then to be able to address it around what is a potential solution. So I think the perspective, the evidence and the impact are always important when you're addressing an issue with anyone, but particularly when you're addressing an issue with the chair, who may not see that behaviour as anything unusual. That's been their behaviour probably for many years. So understanding the impact it's having is a first step in helping them to understand potentially why there needs to be a change.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to the role of management now. And by management, again, depending on the context of the organisation, it could be the executive team, it could be senior volunteers. In our prior discussion, we I guess put forward the idea that we want management to perform their role, to provide reporting for the board, but not to sort of control or sort of over dominate the board. But likewise, on the other side of things, the board needs to let management get on with what management's doing. So the board has to set an appropriate delegated authority for management and then let them actually execute things within that delegated authority. Were there any additional comments to those, Rex?
Yeah, I agree with those comments. I think the phrase that I like to use and hear is that management needs to learn to manage up. A lot of management training is to manage down, and we understand we've got to manage up as well. What I mean by that is to make the job as easy as possible for the board. Make sure that the papers are clear, that they, etc. Answer all the questions so that the board is fully informed. And the papers must be on time. Late papers should be torn up, I believe. So management needs to learn and practice managing up. That'll be a suggestion.
Georgia?
Look, I think there's a really important role of management in board meetings. It is around informing through the papers. It is about them also developing an understanding of the board process, and so that helps improve the effectiveness of the interactions. But most importantly for me, it is around making sure that there's strong alignment. There's building of trust and building in confidence both ways, that the management has confidence in the board and the board has confidence in management to execute. And so that coming together in a board meeting, it is a really valuable touch point for building trust, alignment and confidence to be able to then challenge the difficult things that are going to come up. From that board meeting to the next board meeting, what needs to be raised, understanding of how things need to be addressed effectively from both the board and management perspective. So it's the role of management in board meetings. The key essence for me is trust and alignment.
Excellent. Now, let's say we're in a situation where we haven't defined our values-based behaviours from the beginning. We haven't liaised with the appointers to make sure we've got the right sort of board team there. People aren't responding and behaving as if they are a board team that are constructively challenging each other. Perhaps structures have not been in place. So we have some, quite significant sort of endemic dysfunction. On this one here, I guess in our prior discussion, we decided this was actually quite a common issue. So I don't think people should feel shy if this is the case for them. It's a very, perhaps unfortunately normal experience for too many. We talked a little bit about applying those foundational documents. So it might be the Constitution, or if you have defined those values and things in advance, then we can apply those and test those against there again. Rex, you before, when we had the question around the chair, that idea of making sure that you're not that sort of lone voice or that lone perspective, to see if there are broader perspectives that agree that things are not right, take that opportunity to engage with the chair and also the appointers as well. Georgia, what would you add to this list, or what would you sort of clarify on this list here?
I would say just because your values aren't defined or we don't have values-based behaviours, don't use that as a deterrent for addressing issues. I see this a lot. People go, well, we haven't set our expectations clearly for appropriate behaviours. Many organisations, and I do hate these values, have values of respect, integrity, trust. Now, to me, those should not be values. Those are the basic standard of expectations for how we operate as humans in a business. So if someone is doing something that's behaving in a way that you don't believe is appropriate for your organisation, even if you don't have values defined or you don't have behaviours defined, you need to address it because it's probably unreasonable. So you don't need to wait to have something documented to be able to address dysfunction or address inappropriate behaviours. There is plenty of legislation and regulations addressing issues and behaviours that are inappropriate, and good old common sense and human decency is a good guide for saying the way you've spoken to that person, or way that you've addressed this issue, or whatever the dissatisfaction is or dysfunction is, you can address it. And so I think don't wait if you've got nothing defined. You still address those issues.
Thank you. Rex?
Yeah, and in management techniques, we have a code of conduct which covers issues like bullying and harassment and review. And it just makes sense to me that exactly the same code of conduct covering those things should include governance activities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, Georgia, a rapid fire question for you. Do you believe a full executive team is required in all board meetings?
No. No, again, for what purpose? So it is around what is being discussed at that board meeting. Who is it appropriate? I think certainly executive team members having exposure to board meetings is important. Everyone there all the time? No, not required.
And a second one, Rex, sorry, you'd assent to that one as well?
Yes, I agree.
Excellent. Georgia, one more for you. Would you recommend that the internal audit function assists with a governance pack, which will consist of board charter and corporate secretary charter? So should the internal audit function weigh in on contributing to those sort of founding and important documents?
No, not necessarily. Again, I'd ask for what purpose. So I don't think an internal audit function is going to be necessarily skilled or capable to address those. Depends on the organisation, of course, but no, I don't think so.
And one for both of you now. Rex, we'll start with you.
Sorry, if I could just pick up there, though, very briefly, the Audit and Risk Committee, carefully structured and with a very carefully thought about terms of reference. The Audit and Risk Committee can be very constructive, whistleblower activities and things like that. So I don't want to go on about that, but in bigger organisations, I think good terms of reference for an Audit and Risk Committee can be very helpful.
Agree.
Thank you. Now, next one for both of you, starting with Rex, is around diversity on boards. So, Rex, in your opinion, how would you address a lack of diversity on the board?
Well, lack of diversity. So this is up to the appointers. Again, we come back to that very, very important element. But then it's also up to the chair to make sure that the opinions of diversity are well heard, given sufficient weight. The people who are new to governance and who may be coming from a sector of the community which is not well represented, that those people are very, very well supported. So I like to see diversity, but it can be a problem unless it's much more than just making the appointment.
I agree.
Yeah,
it can't be tokenistic, and again, it needs to be looking at what is the type of diversity that we're looking for. Are we looking, diversity of experience or education or gender or geographic locations, or what is the diversity? I think that needs to be defined. Again, why are we looking for this diversity? One of the things that I get frustrated with is boards that are representing community members with particular lived experiences, such as disability, who don't have someone on the board who has a lived experience with that, whatever the diverse condition might be. And they're making strategic decisions about issues that are impacting these people. So I think the board needs to set some parameters about what diversity is required and why, and what are the benefits for that, and then actively work to recruit directors onto the board who are going to add value to the board because of their lived experience in whatever diverse way that is.
Great. Now, one final question. This is from Andy. What are your thoughts on having the senior functional manager responsible within the organisation at the relevant board subcommittee, for example, the CFO at the finance subcommittee? My view would be absolutely highly relevant, absolutely good practice. I see some nodding heads there.
Yes.
That's fantastic. So we've reached time, I think, Sean. So passing back to you. Wait, before I do that, sorry, I was going to summarise things before we step away. So we have discussed having defined values-based behaviours and the critical role for appointers. We've discussed selecting the right chair and then proactively supporting them in their role, how structure can enable culture, but structure does need to be fit for purpose. Avoiding management dominating boards, but also respecting management's delegated authority. Addressing dysfunction by referencing your foundational documents and your predefined values, hopefully, but otherwise the values that the organisation holds anyway. But ultimately, unfortunately, your best move might be to resign if the board cannot set the right tone from the top.
Well said, Lloyd. Well said. So everybody, my apologies if we've run out of time for the other questions. There were some great questions coming through there, guys, weren't there?
Fantastic.
Good stuff.
Please feel free to reach out to Lloyd, Georgia, or Rex. And at the end of the webinar, there will be the short survey. It'll only take you a minute or so. There'll be an opportunity there to reach out to Lloyd, Georgia, or Rex as well. Lloyd, if you could just advance to the next slide. These are the webinars we have coming up from February 21st through till April. The next one features Margot Foster, Options for Board Evaluations That Really Work. There's going to be some great content there. So this will be sent out to you in an email later on today. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lloyd, for making my job easy today. Really appreciate it.
Been great fun. Thank you very much to our panelists. Well done to Georgia and Rex. Really good insights you've shared today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again.